Welcome. This is a follow-up lesson to Knapp's model of relational escalation. Now we're going to focus on Knapp's stages of de-escalation or coming apart. The lesson overview will examine each of the 5 stages of coming apart: differentiating, circumscribing, stagnation, avoiding, and finally termination. Let's take a look and start with relational de-escalation stage 1, which is differentiating. With differentiating, we will examine the purpose and the communication. The purpose is to reestablish individual identities apart from the relationship. This is a completely normal stage that all couples, friendships, co-working relations would experience. This stage is a part of relationship maintenance. Dialectical tensions occur here, and dialectical tensions are conflicts that arise when any opposing or incompatible goals exist simultaneously. And I'll have a follow-up lesson about dialectical tensions in another video. Also, conflict exists during the differentiating stage. So although these sound like red flag warnings and troubling times for a relationship, which they can be, these are also normal stages of a relationship. All relationships go through hard times. So there are peaks and valleys. And during the tough patches, there's going to be conflict and dialectical tensions are going to exist. A major shift in communication that happens here is that we shift our language back from the we and us to you and I. So instead of what are we doing this weekend, it's I really need to do this weekend. And it's kind of pulling at the tension between us being an us and reminding us that we're unique, we're different. We have our own thoughts, values, ideas, and we also need our own time apart from the relationship. So again, although this could lead to problems, it's also very normal to remind ourselves that there are 2 different people that are in this relationship that make it an us. So the ultimate focus for communication here would just be on how different we are. I want you to think about how the differentiating stage can be positive for the people in the relationship. So again, although we're talking about relationships coming apart and leading to termination, sometimes the differentiating stage could actually, highlight the positive in the relationship. So maybe we haven't been communicating effectively, and by focusing on our differences or learning how to solve our relationship conflicts could be beneficial, and I'll talk more about that later. The second stage is called circumscribing. Here the purpose is that really there's a constraint on the relationship. It's almost as if there was like a weight on the relationship, right? Weighing it down, holding it back, not allowing for any growth to happen. Here we realize more dissatisfaction with our partner and or the relationship. So of course our partner has flaws and weaknesses, but unfortunately during this stage, those flaws and weaknesses are highlighted. More signs of stress and tension, and unfortunately conflict tends to take on a pattern. So conflict becomes more routine within the relationship and it happens more frequently. Clearly now you could start to see that although many of these purposes are normal and natural to happen in any relationship, even the most happy relationships, it could start turning into this progressing further and these circumscribing purposes to take on patterns and become problematic for the relationship. With communication, there are more areas of separation than integration in the relationship. So my room, my bank account, those are your friends. But again, that shift in language, instead of it our house or our money or our friends, we want to remind them that, no, that's your friend. There's a decrease in overall quality and quantity, less intimacy and commitment talk. We also use what we call public face saving strategies. And so, really, just to save our credibility, we will, especially when we're out in public around other people, we won't let others know that we're having problems. So, if we show up to a family barbecue on the weekend, we're not going to let our family know that we were fighting on the car ride over to the barbecue. And we call that public face saving because that would be embarrassing, or that would burden our family members. We don't want to let them know about our problems. That would be like, throwing it all out there. So instead, we pretend that everything's okay, even when it's not. And finally, we make excuses for why we're disinterested in the relationship or don't put in much effort. So we make excuses for how we're tired because we've had a long day at work or school, and therefore, we can't partake in date night tonight. When normally every Friday night is date night. But when you're having issues with your partner, sometimes we make up these excuses to avoid them or to not have to deal with them. And so that's what the second stage is all about. A question you can ponder would be, how do friendships go through the circumscribing stage? So most of my examples were talking about romantic partners, but how do friendships also sometimes deal with tension and conflict and stress when it comes to the differences in the relationship? The third stage is called stagnation, and anything that's stagnant does not move. The relationship here is really remaining motionless during this stage, so little to no positive growth occurs. And we usually like to think of relationships as fluid and dynamic and always growing and changing. But in this stage, it's just not happening. Instead, partners or friendships are behaving towards each other, following the same old routines, but without much joy. So if you think about a romantic partnership in which the pair is cohabitating, meaning they're living together, there's certain pattern behaviors that go on a day-to-day basis. So one wakes up, they make the coffee for the other person, maybe the dog has to be walked, or the kids have to be taken to school, the bills have to be paid, the laundry has to be done. So if you think about all the typical behaviors from cooking and cleaning that happen on any given day. Now, when you're happy and you're joyful towards your partner, you hand them their cup of coffee with a smile on your face. But when you're not happy and there's more tension in the household, you might make the coffee every morning to continue your same routine, but you leave it on the counter and your partner can fend for themselves. So that's kind of the example I use to explain this idea of stagnation. We're kind of robotic. We're in the relationship and we're still behaving in the same old ways we're used to, month after month or year after year. But the joy is what's truly lacking, and that can be really sad. Here in communication, we have continued decrease in quality and quantity. The emphasis on nonverbal communication is heavier, as opposed to our verbal communication or what we're saying to each other. So we might be slamming doors or not calling somebody back. Those are some nonverbal behaviors that we use during the stagnation period rather than confronting the other person verbally. We also have what we call imagined interactions. And imagined interactions can take on a variety of different forms in a stagnated stage of a relationship. For instance, when we're confused, because this is a very confusing stage, we don't exactly know, what's happening to the relationship. We don't know what the other person in the relationship is thinking because we're not communicating much in this stage about our relationship. So within an imagined interaction, we might imagine, what if our relationship could get better, what would that look like and how would we get there? We also imagine, what if the relationship doesn't get better and it continues to get worse? What does that look like and how would that happen? And a third possible alternative for an imagined interaction is, what would life be like with somebody else? Now, of course, I'm not advocating that. However, according to research, this is a stage in which most affairs would occur. So infidelity in a relationship. If one person was to cheat on their partner, it may happen because they've reached this relational stage of stagnation. The relationships remain motionless. We're in it, but we're not in it, right? We're in it, but maybe emotionally we're not. Or physically, we're no longer intimate with each other. And so once we take on these unfortunate characteristics of the stagnation stage, people might, a partner in the relationship might look elsewhere for attention, for love, for, feeling good, those sorts of things. So again, I'm not advocating for that, but I'm just letting us understand how that could potentially happen. So this third stage of stagnation, it could last a short period of time. Sometimes we just hit stagnation for a few weeks or a few months in a relationship, and other times it lasts for many, many, many years. So imagine a married couple could have been together for 15 years. And let's say the first 5 to 7 years were really wonderful in the relationship. And then as they, continued on, they started hitting the stages of relational decline, from differentiating to circumscribing to now being in stagnation. And maybe now they're stagnating for 5, 7, 10 years. So again, you could stagnate for a long period of time if you can't figure out ways to make the relationship flourish again, grow, be healthy, harmonious, and happy. Our next question that I have for you is, how can the stagnation stage be related to a work type situation? So have you ever felt that at work you're kind of just in this motionless stage, or maybe you're robotic? You're just behaving in the same old routines at work, but without much joy. And I hate to say, but there are probably a lot of people in America or around the world who work in a stagnated fashion. The fourth stage is avoiding. Here the purpose is physical and or psychological separation. There's reduced interest and energy towards the relationship, and unfortunately the future of the relationship doesn't look good. Sometimes we call this the trial before the breakup. So we tend to start acting like we're broken up before we actually break up. Sometimes couples may even call this going on a quote unquote break. So clearly, coming out of the stagnation stage, you could see how mentally, emotionally, and even physically we could be avoiding or separating from each other. Again, all before we've actually officially broken up. Of course, with the communication in this stage, the focus is really on the distance. For example, when a couple fights, like a married couple fights, maybe one of the spouses sleeps on the couch for several nights. Or if the fight is so big or conflict has ensued, maybe one of them moves out for a little while. They move in with a friend, or they move back to a parent's house, but it's almost to give the partnership some cooling off time. We really need to avoid each other right now until we figure things out. And so those are just some examples of how we might avoid each other. Sometimes couples separate and not officially break up. And so we just say, for the next month, let's kind of spend some time apart and see how it goes. That would also be an example of this avoiding stage. And so for every couple, it looks a little different, but ultimately you're separating. Finally, we reach the last stage, and this is called termination, according to Knapp's model. The purpose here is disassociation from one another. So it's an identifiable public pattern of termination of the relationship. It's known to the public because at work, we've taken down the photos of our wedding. I stopped wearing the wedding ring. There's just various ways that the public, through family and friends, are aware that the relationship is over. We also have what we call relationship resolution through justification. And that just means that we have to rationalize for ourselves why the relationship ended. What's the story? What's the reasoning? And then often we share that with others. So through communication, the emphasis is really on the self now. It's all about the I and how you heal yourself and, become a better you. We have stories about our past relationship, and again, that relationship rationalization is communicated to others through these stories that we have. So termination, again, is the final stage of the relationship, but I did just want to mention that sometimes couples break up, so they reach the 5th stage of termination, but then they work things out, so they get back together. It would probably be rare. However, sometimes a couple divorces and they marry that exact same partner again. Just as, probably more commonly, although not completely common, a couple may break up and then get back together at a later date. So you're not completely doomed. The relationship's not completely doomed if you do hit the relational termination stage. Although research does suggest that most relationships that hit termination, it would be very unlikely for the couple to get back together.